The sacred texts whisper of two men bearing the name Enoch. One, the righteous prophet, known for his divine companionship, who was ultimately taken by God. The other, an heir to a curse, stepped out of the vast, bloody shadow of Cain. Yet, it was this second, lesser-known Enoch who dared to erect the first metropolis after the earth witnessed its inaugural act of fratricide. And it was he who received celestial visions, prophecies so profound, so terrifyingly explicit, that the established church systems later dedicated centuries to obliterating his very name from the accepted historical record. Imagine, what if the profound, foundational secrets of the cosmos were not entrusted to a saintly seer, but were instead unveiled to the direct descendant of humanity's first murderer? This is the text they declared heretical. These are the apocalyptic revelations they desperately suppressed, the grave warnings that instilled paralyzing fear in the hearts of religious authority. Long before the final words of Genesis were inscribed, millennia before Noah ever laid the keel of the ark, one man witnessed the entire impending catastrophe. His name was Enoch, but discard the image you hold. In this profound expedition, you will traverse the blood-drenched lowlands outside Eden, stand alongside the Watchers as they commence their catastrophic descent, and bear witness to the unnatural genesis of the Nephilim giants. We will meticulously decipher the ancient book that accurately foretold the global flood, the advent of the Messiah, and the final cessation of days, long before the accepted scriptures even hinted at them. This is not merely the biography of a single man. It is the comprehensive account of cosmic rebellion, undeniable revelation, and a historical document the Church desperately hoped you would never discover. Welcome to Echoes of the Nazarene, where the prohibited scriptures are resurrecting into life. We refuse to simply recount Sunday school stories. We actively expose what was deliberately concealed. We revive that which was ruthlessly forbidden, and we venture into territories others deem too perilous. Subscribe immediately because this is far more than mere footage. It is an unveiling. Chapter 1: The Blood That Cried Out. In the absolute beginning, there was only the primal breath, the shapeless dust, and a single volatile spark of the divine fire. Two siblings trod the newly formed earth. They spoke to the very same Creator, yet the cadence of their hearts beat to fundamentally conflicting rhythms. Abel presented a perfect offering from the firstlings of his flock, a genuine expression of pure reverence and sacrificial honor. Cain, conversely, brought a yield from the ground, a gift born of intense human labor, perhaps even entitlement, and certainly wounded pride. But only one submission found divine favor. When the Almighty accepted Abel's gift and conspicuously rejected Cain's, the primal bond of humanity shattered. It was a searing fracture, an immediate, deafening silence, swiftly followed by a volcanic fury. And in that moment of unbridled rage, history was forever marked by its first act of human murder. Genesis 4 verse 8 recounts the event not with apocalyptic thunder, but with a chilling, surgical whisper. Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. There was no preliminary dispute, no attempt at reconciliation, no hint of compassion or regret. The innocent blood saturated the fertile soil, and the very ground cried out in response to the violation. Your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. This was not merely the loss of a life. It was a cosmic disruption, a metaphysical cry echoing through the celestial halls. That spilled blood was anything but mute. It reverberated across time, howling of shattered loyalty, broken kinship, and a defiled divine plan. Cain was not simply the inaugural murderer. He was the first human being to commit calculated, cold-blooded defiance against heaven itself. Yet, this narrative pivots to an astonishing conclusion, a detail rarely explored in conventional religious settings. God did not execute Cain. He did not mandate the expected life for a life retribution. Instead, he performed an unthinkable act. He placed a unique mark upon him. For millennia, theologians have debated the nature of this symbol. Was it a visible stigma on his skin? Was it a profound spiritual burden? A sign of eternal shame, or a specific active protection? Genesis 4 verse 15 reveals a nuance frequently overlooked. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. The mark of Cain was not solely an instrument of divine penalty. It was an unparalleled demonstration of profound mercy. Cain was certainly condemned to exile, yet he was simultaneously preserved. Banished from Eden's proximity, but not utterly annihilated. Judged, yet still safeguarded under an unwavering divine vigilance. What manner of deity safeguards a confessed killer? One who perceives far deeper than mere bloodshed. A God who grasps that even within the most severe decree of judgment, the subtle prospect of redemption continues to beckon. Cain abandoned the established borders of Eden, plunging into the unknown wilderness, destined to be a lifelong wanderer, as the scripture states. However, Cain was not a soul resigned to drifting. He was not a man predisposed to accepting a divine curse without massive, tangible resistance. The ancient writings record that Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. Pause here, for with the arrival of this child, the entire course of early human history violently shifted. This is not the famed Enoch, son of Jared, the one renowned for walking faithfully with God and disappearing. This is Enoch, the very firstborn of Cain's cursed lineage, a name that history actively attempted to bury beneath the mantle of a more acceptable, righteous legacy. Yet this Enoch was destined to be a founder. And Cain, sentenced forever to be a wandering fugitive, commits an act of shocking insurrection. He digs his feet into the earth. He unilaterally repudiates the divine sentence. He constructs a civilization, and he built a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Genesis 4 verse 17. This was not passive obedience. This was brazen architectural defiance. A direct contradiction to the God's decree. You shall be a fugitive and a vagabond. Cain's rebellion was no longer limited to blood. It was now cemented in brick and mortar. He established the first human city, not based on sacred instruction, but fueled entirely by raw human ambition. And he named it for his son, specifically to immortalize his bloodline, a defiant declaration. My curse stops with me. My legacy will endure through him. Is there not a profound irony that the first great city of humanity was not erected by the faithful, but by the profoundly cursed? This initial metropolis, this foundational act of construction, and this son, Enoch, unintentionally gave birth to human civilization itself. While the line of Seth devoted their lives to quiet worship, the line of Cain furiously engaged in building. One side withdrew toward newly raised altars, the other rapidly erected formidable stone monuments. One group sought communion through prayer, the other mastered the earth through forging complex tools. It was exclusively through Cain's lineage that metallurgy was born, advanced livestock husbandry was developed, and sophisticated musical instruments were first conceived, as meticulously detailed in Genesis 4 verses 21 to 22. Human high culture, art, intricate architecture, and material invention did not emerge from the pious, but astonishingly, from the rejected. Herein lies the profound, uncomfortable mystery. Was it possible that the Creator permitted such spectacular greatness to spring forth from deep brokenness? That even the most heavily cursed lineage still contained surviving fragments of the divine creative spark? Cain's descendants produced groundbreaking inventors, masterful musicians, and unparalleled craftsmen. But that same bloodline simultaneously bred escalating cycles of violence, merciless vengeance, and corrosive pride. Lamech, one of his infamous great-grandsons, would later openly boast of committing murder, dramatically escalating the lethal cycle Cain initiated. Cain, therefore, stands as the progenitor not just of murder, but of human technological advancement, and its terrifying dark reflection. And in the midst of this overwhelming paradox, we meet Enoch, the firstborn son of the murderer, raised entirely within walls constructed by blood. A boy conceived under an inherited shadow, yet also provided access to tremendous power, advanced knowledge, and unyielding ambition. Few ever speak of this particular Enoch, his identity entirely eclipsed by the fame of his righteous namesake. The prophet Enoch walked with God and was no more. This Enoch, however, walked among high, defiant city walls. He inherited a world saturated with power, complex knowledge, and staggering ambition. He observed the creation of mechanical systems, the shaping of specialized tools, and the founding of something entirely novel: sustained civilization. Perhaps this is precisely why his narrative was systematically suppressed, because it forces us to acknowledge that the foundational roots of our most admired cities might be eternally stained with rebellion. The saga of humanity is not solely a history of simple worship. It is fundamentally a story of raw, unyielding human will. Yet, what cataclysm occurs when the son of a man defined by murder dares to seek communion with the very God his father brazenly defied? What transpires when Enoch, the product of the city, the true heir of Cain's empire, finally kneels to pray? Because he did. And astonishingly, heaven responded. Remain with us. In Chapter 2, we will penetrate the core of the first great city and witness the inception of a phenomenon never intended to exist. A civilization forged in absolute defiance of the divine plan for Eden. Chapter 2. The first city and the rise of man. The air itself carries a different, heavier density when construction is undertaken in direct opposition to divine command. Cain refused to accept the solitude of wandering. He could not tolerate the deafening silence of permanent exile, the inescapable curse of perpetual drifting. Consequently, he enacted the standard recourse of many profoundly cursed men. He built something immutable and lasting. Genesis 4 verse 17 relays this fact with stark simplicity. And Cain built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. However, this was not merely a large-scale construction project. It was a potent political act of rebellion, a carved-in-stone declaration asserting, "You may exile me, but I will control my destiny and I will not vanish." The first city established in human history possessed no holiness whatsoever. It was ruthlessly, purely human. There was no dedicated temple within Cain's city limits, no smoking altar, no ritual sacrifice. There was only massive stone, ceaseless labor, immense sweat, and the pursuit of an eternal legacy. Cain did not build primarily for basic subsistence. He built for domination and for glory. He did not establish altars. He established unbreachable walls. He did not seek God's presence. He sought absolute control. And into that world his son Enoch was born. Not the righteous Enoch from Jared's lineage, but the city's concrete namesake. Imagine the experience. A child raised not amidst open, quiet fields, but constantly confined behind ascending walls. Not cradled in the hush of a divine presence, but immersed in the deafening clang of hammers and the scorching heat of the industrial forge. He observed men expertly bending metal, shaping complex tools, fully domesticating powerful animals, and crafting intricate, modulated sound from strings and air columns. Civilization did not begin in a moment of worship. It began in a moment of violent rejection. Cain's line flourished aggressively, not by any measure of divine endorsement, but purely through overwhelming human will and relentless drive. Genesis 4 verses 20 to 22 provides the lineage names that have been tragically forgotten in most modern sermons. Yet they fundamentally shaped everything we currently define as human culture. Jabal, the foundational shepherd, father to those who inhabit tents and possess organized livestock. Jubal, the premier artist, father to all who master the harp and the flute. And Tubal-Cain, the master instructor, a sophisticated craftsman in every category of bronze and iron. These men, the direct sons of Cain's lineage, were the world's first professional musicians, its first highly specialized metallurgists, and its first wealthy, organized nomads. They were the originators of mechanical arts, sophisticated musical theory, and formalized trade networks. While the lineage of Seth knelt in devotion, the lineage of Cain rapidly advanced. And Enoch, the city's designated namesake, stood at the vibrant, violent heart of it all. He was the prince of the first city, the unquestioned heir of a cursed empire, conceived in rebellion, raised amidst technological brilliance. He walked avenues where no dedicated worship occurred, where no fragrant altar smoke ascended to heaven, but where the industrial fires burned constantly, not to purify or sanctify, but solely to shape, manipulate, and control. Iron, bronze, gold, forging both magnificent instruments and devastating weapons. There is a profoundly unsettling truth here, that the earliest music ever performed echoed not in sacred hymns of praise, but in the proud declaration of man's self-sufficiency. That the first forge to successfully melt iron did not create implements of peace, but instead opened the terrifying pathway to the invention of swords and armor. The creations themselves were not inherently wicked, but their fundamental nature was warped because they were conceived entirely without the counsel of the Creator. It was innovation entirely devoid of reverence, art lacking all submission, and mastery without any trace of humility. Cain's metropolis served as the perfect ideological prototype for Babylon, a systemized world where mankind strives to reach upward, not with the goal of touching heaven, but with the specific intent of replacing it. The city transcended mere construction. It was a potent, governing ideology. It marked the birth of the city of man, where relentless progress is the reigning sovereign and dedicated worship is dismissed as a historical relic. It was the cradle of emergent technology, the womb of sophisticated culture, and the foundational empire of total independence. And astonishingly, it worked. God, notably, did not immediately intervene. He permitted the city to flourish. He allowed Cain's descendants to achieve great things. He sanctioned the expression of raw human potential, even when it was fundamentally rooted in bloodshed. And within that radical freedom, a dangerous, revolutionary precedent was established. Because when humans manage to thrive without any reliance on God, they inevitably begin to wholeheartedly believe they do not, in fact, need God at all. We have often mistakenly assumed that everything originating from heaven must manifest in a distinctly spiritual appearance. But sometimes, the most insidious and seductive force is not the overtly demonic, but the human capacity entirely unchecked by divine authority. Cain's city was not defined by hellfire. It was defined by humanism, and that distinction made it exponentially more dangerous. The core spirit of Cain's civilization remains vividly alive today in any societal system that glorifies man, actively marginalizes the divine, and mistakenly labels that trajectory as progress. Now focus again on Enoch. He is Cain's offspring, yes, but he is also constantly immersed in genius, invention, highly organized structure, and undeniable power. He perceives not a realm of curse, but a world of spectacular achievement, all successfully erected upon his father's defiance. He is trained to lead. He meticulously studies men manipulating metals, establishing massive organized flocks, and setting up intricate trade protocols. He witnesses women creating complex song and rhythm. He perceives order where previously there was only fearful wandering. Yet, somewhere deep within his core, a subversive question begins its relentless stirring. Is this truly the extent of existence? Because regardless of how high the city walls ascend, the heavens above remain eerily, stubbornly silent. There are no petitions offered in Cain's city, no voices raised in genuine repentance, only mechanical song without spirit, only perfected structure without soul. And perhaps, it is in that precise void, that agonizing silence, that his spirit was first profoundly unsettled. Not by formal religion, nor by established tradition, but by an acute, holy hunger that no amount of civilization could ever satiate. And when human progress reaches its zenith, the soul inevitably begins to ache for something deeper, something far older than bronze, something exponentially louder than the music, something infinitely higher than the highest city walls. And so, in absolute secrecy, the son of Cain initiated prayer, and heaven heard him. Don't dare turn away. In chapter 3, we penetrate the mind of this forgotten Enoch and witness the stunning consequences when a man born of total rebellion dares to reach for the divine. What he ultimately saw changed the course of the world forever. Chapter 3. Between two worlds. There are rare, pivotal moments in the timeline of history when an individual is born directly between two conflicting legacies. Not entirely cursed, yet not officially chosen. Neither perfectly righteous nor definitively damned, but held in suspension between two distinct worlds. This is precisely the crucible in which we find Enoch, son of Cain. Not yet the taken prophet, this is the first Enoch, the one birthed into systematic rebellion, yet profoundly stirred by a power greater than ambition. He traverses avenues paved by relentless human drive. He listens to compositions authored by the chronically restless. He watches forges burn with incredible brilliance, utilized not for sacred worship, but for the manufacturing of lethal weaponry. He witnesses the spectacular ascent of humanity, but he simultaneously begins to perceive the inevitable descent. Because the higher man constructs his domain without God, the more devastating the subsequent collapse. On the opposing side of the world, the other lineage was steadily rising. The line of Seth, the third son granted to Adam and Eve after Abel's blood saturated the ground. Genesis 4 verse 26 notes a simple yet cosmically profound shift. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. Where Cain's descendants were erecting sprawling cities, Seth's descendants were painstakingly constructing altars. Where Cain's sons expertly forged bronze and iron, Seth's sons were silently forging prayers. Two divergent bloodlines, two antithetical legacies, two competing cultures. One obsessed with achieving total dominion, the other single-mindedly pursuing devotion. Young Enoch, a product of Cain, began to feel an inexplicable, deep-seated ache. He was functionally born from progress, yet instinctively drawn to presence. He could not initially articulate the feeling. He only understood that a crucial element was missing from his magnificent city, something the towering walls could not provide, something the masterful music could not awaken. While his peers sang merely for temporal enjoyment, he began to strain his ears for ultimate meaning. While others ruthlessly shaped metal, he yearned to be shaped by the invisible hand of the unseen. He caught whispers not from mortal men, but from something primeval, something rooted deeper than history. Sometimes, the divine calling arrives not in devastating thunder, but in a simple, piercing inquiry. Is this genuinely all there is? The city was undoubtedly brilliant, yet it was also fundamentally broken. It possessed enormous power but no lasting peace. Imposing structure but zero soul. Flawless order but no genuine awe. Enoch began to detect the deep fractures beneath the polished veneers. The violence simmering beneath the boastful success. The spirit of vengeance inherited like ancestral wealth. The arrogance perpetually masked as innovation. He watched inventors simultaneously become oppressors. He saw functional tools rapidly morph into lethal weapons. He observed beauty corrupted by corrosive pride, and a profound grief began to stir within him. Enoch recognized that progress entirely absent of God inevitably leads only to ruin. He started to slip away, not to flee the metropolis, but to escape its suffocating noise. He sought out silent corners. He walked to the very boundary of civilization where the stone city met the desolate wilderness. There, immersed in the stillness, he began to speak, not addressing his fellow man, but addressing the silent sky. He possessed no formalized structure for prayer, but he knew exactly how to long. And sometimes, profound longing is the true precursor to divine revelation. He gazed upward. He waited patiently. He asked the great questions, even though he had no certain knowledge of who might be listening. And heaven began to answer. Meanwhile, the two worlds he existed between were moving aggressively in opposing trajectories. Cain's line, his own people, were technologically advancing faster than ever. Metals, music, vast urban centers, hypercomplex trade systems. They were effectively crowning themselves as gods of their own invention. Seth's line, the other people, were still wandering, still offering sacrifice, still dedicated to pure worship. But they, too, were sensing the shift. A rising tension, a massive, impending cataclysm. Because as man's power dramatically increased, the earth beneath them grew fundamentally more volatile. Enoch stood precisely at this massive fault line. He was not genuinely accepted by Seth's pious lineage. He was certainly not fully at peace among Cain's ruthless builders. He was, in every meaningful sense, a man of mixed heritage. One legacy dripping with relentless ambition, the other gently pulsing with the possibility of repentance. Enoch inherited genius, but his soul deeply ached for God. We consistently overlook the critical fact that some of the most powerful spiritual awakenings often originate from those who were never raised within a context of conventional righteousness. Sometimes, it is the direct offspring of rebellion who recognizes the desperate need for restoration most lucidly. And Enoch, surrounded by all the material brilliance of humanity's first civilization, began to fully comprehend its spiritual vacuity. Its gold glittered attractively. Its music was sensorially stirring. Its structures reached aggressively upward, but absolutely none of it made contact with the heavens. He realized the builders had completely ignored the architect. They had mastered the visible domain but totally disregarded the invisible. And perhaps, for the very first time in his city's brief, defiant history, a man sank to his knees, not to an earthly king, nor to a manufactured god of metal, but to the ineffable one whose name cannot be captured by human hands. Enoch was unaware of it then, but heaven had been waiting millennia for that exact moment. Because sometimes it requires only a single person to tear open the skies once more. One solitary figure in a vast city of rebels, one vulnerable whisper in a deafening world of noise, one earnest seeker born from the cursed lineage. And when heaven intercepts a voice such as that, it does not remain silent. The celestial spheres respond not to earthly lineage or status, but only to genuine spiritual hunger. So what does this profound story signify for us in this present moment? Because perhaps you were not born into a history of holiness. Perhaps you were not nurtured amidst the altars. Perhaps your own name is irrevocably tied to deep brokenness, troubled bloodlines, or outright familial rebellion. But perhaps, just like Enoch, you are beginning to perceive a compelling call that transcends the daily noise. A whisper piercing the night, a powerful magnetic pull from eternity, an aching desire for something greater than mere success, survival, or fleeting applause. Enoch's narrative is not centered on achieving perfection. It is the story of a man who categorically refused to allow his past origins to dictate his eternal destiny. It is the record of a man who planted himself firmly at the border of two conflicting worlds and deliberately chose to seek the realm beyond both. And what he ultimately discovered was not merely revelation. It was a functioning doorway, because when a man conceived in rebellion begins to earnestly listen for the voice of heaven, he will inevitably hear truths that the comfortably righteous have long forgotten, and he will witness things no earthly builder could ever create. Stay with me. In chapter 4, Enoch's quiet, desperate prayers will violently tear open the celestial veil, and what he sees will fundamentally shake the heavens and the earth, because some visions are not granted to established prophets, but to the entirely unlikely, the persistently overlooked, the desperate ones who dare to simply ask. Chapter 4. The Visitation. He held no formal ordination. He was never designated as a prophet. He was merely the son of a murderer, the inherited heir of a cursed bloodline. And yet, heaven listened intently. Enoch's prayers lacked all eloquence. He possessed no designated altar for supplication, no sacred scrolls to guide his readings. His hands were rough and calloused from manipulating stone, not from turning delicate scripture pages. His progenitors had excelled at shaping cities, not founding temples. Yet, in the silent, hidden corners of the deepest night, far from the industrial clang of metal and the pervasive pulse of music, he initiated a routine of fasting, waiting, and deeply listening. He had no certainty that any power would answer, yet a compelling whisper within him urged, "What if they do?" Days stretched into weeks. The immense city carried on its materialistic routine. Men traded furiously, composed complicated melodies, and refined molten iron. And then it erupted. One pivotal night, as the remote stars glittered coldly above the imposing city walls, an extraordinary light began to violently disrupt the surrounding darkness. It was not mere flame. It was not moonlight. It was something utterly antithetical to the earthly realm, yet simultaneously present. Enoch froze utterly, his knees involuntarily collapsing, his breath trapped somewhere between paralyzing terror and overwhelming reverence. From the very heart of this blinding light, a definite form materialized. Not a common man, nor a wild creature, but something impossibly ancient, radiantly powerful. It was Uriel, the archangel of wisdom and light. He did not arrive brandishing a sword. He did not come with immediate judgment. He arrived solely to reveal. And Uriel spoke the ancient decree. You have intensely sought. Now you shall profoundly perceive. Enoch plummeted to the ground, not entirely out of fear, but from immediate recognition. Somehow, intrinsically, he understood this being was far more than a source of light. This was a designated messenger from the deepest, most concealed chambers of God. Uriel placed a reassuring hand upon his shoulder, and the ordinary flow of time instantly shattered. The stars whirled violently. The earth beneath him dissolved. And suddenly, Enoch was no longer confined to his father's city. He was being swiftly transported, carried far beyond the limits of known space, far beyond human sight, into celestial realms that few mortals have ever entered. What he subsequently witnessed defied all capacity for human language. Yet he would attempt to describe it. He would later write, using not only ink but a trembling hand, accounts of visions too vast and terrifying for the mortal mind to fully process. He saw the tree of life, glowing with a divine fire that somehow never consumed itself. He saw uncountable multitudes of angels meticulously arranged in perfect, complex hierarchy, each possessing a specific function, each emitting a unique, celestial sound. He saw the heavenly throne, utterly engulfed by glory, wreathed in continuous thunder, seated in a majesty that was entirely unspeakable. Heaven had opened its deepest secrets, not to a sanctioned prophet, but to the son of a city builder. The celestial beings moved in flawless, synchronized rhythm, wheels within wheels, eyes that saw the totality of existence, voices that literally sang creation into continuous being. Enoch watched, weeping uncontrollably. He saw the designated realms where the righteous souls would finally reside. He saw chambers dedicated to eternal waiting. He saw vast record scrolls containing the final names of all men and the hidden, mechanical secrets of the stars. Heaven, he suddenly understood, was not an abstract concept. It was not a foggy mist. It was not a mythological fable. It was infinitely more tangible and real than the stone walls of his father's cursed city. His father's city, the city his father had forged in defiance. And this heavenly realm had been silent, patiently waiting for a single, desperate heart to simply reach out and ask the deepest question. Uriel, the messenger of fire, spoke with a voice that resonated not in Enoch's ears, but in his bones. He made it clear that Enoch had not been selected by virtue of his ancestry or earthly achievement, but solely because of the fierce, consuming fire of his yearning. The divine responds not to the convenience of established bloodlines, but to the desperate, unquenchable hunger of the soul. Revelation is not granted to the seemingly perfect or the self-satisfied, but to those who pursue the truth with unwavering persistence. Immediately following this divine commission, Enoch was granted a chilling vision of the Watchers, the exalted angels who had once descended to walk among humanity. They were dispatched by the highest council, sent to act as guardians, sent to mentor and guide the nascent human race. But in this close proximity to creation's beauty and its inherent weaknesses, some of their number had irrevocably shifted. Their celestial eyes were no longer mirrors of purity. Their mission, once defined by holiness, became stained by dark curiosity. They were destined to become the true fallen ones, the Grigori, those mighty watchers who deliberately descended to corrupt the daughters of men. Yet, Enoch's vision pierced deeper than just their physical descent. He saw the very instant of their internal decay. He witnessed the fractional moment the first watcher hesitated in his duty. He saw the fatal insertion of raw, illicit desire into the sacred heart of a heavenly being. The moment strict obedience shattered and reformed itself into towering ambition, the cosmic balance was violently disrupted. Heaven recoiled in horror, and the fragile earth was set to absorb the terrible, eternal price. But the revelation did not conclude there. Uriel pulled back the curtain on the ages yet to come. Enoch witnessed a catastrophic deluge, a vast, churning floodwater consuming the entire surface of the world. He saw the miraculous preservation of a small family remnant. He saw empires rise in arrogance and saw those proud kingdoms fall into dust. Most startlingly, he saw the distant, inevitable arrival of a Son of Man, riding on clouds of glory with fire blazing in his eyes. He saw the final, sweeping judgment and the glorious, subsequent restoration of all things. Heaven meticulously unrolled the entire intricate tapestry of history, past, present, and future, before his mortal gaze. And then, it presented him with the most unforeseen instrument, a divine task. Enoch was chosen not only to witness the prophecy, but to serve as its steward and registrar. Uriel commanded him, "Write down every vision you see for generations yet unborn, for the days that lie far beyond the memory of your own time." Enoch was thereby consecrated as the true scribe of heaven, the first mortal entrusted to inscribe the actual words of angels, the initial human hand to transcribe celestial visions drawn from beyond the sacred veil. Given the weight of the task, he was immediately supplied with eternal ink and a pristine scroll. In the very heart of overwhelming glory, he began to write. This singular, profound moment is far too easy to casually dismiss, yet it fundamentally alters the entire trajectory of the human narrative. At this point in history, the act of writing had not even been formally mentioned in the Genesis accounts. No mortal soul had previously been summoned to record a divine revelation. Enoch instantly transcended his time, becoming the very first prophetic author. Not Moses the lawgiver, not Isaiah the visionary, not even Adam the primal father. Before the concept of formalized scripture existed, there was the existence of Enoch's scroll. He diligently recorded the hierarchy of the angels, the meticulous orders governing creation, the hidden secrets controlling the luminaries, the precise paths of the sun and the moon. He wrote down the devastating names of the fallen ones and the urgent warnings meant for future mankind. But transcending mere chronicle, he filled his pages with the fierce urgency of hope, the radical assurance that even in a world brutally misshapen by profound rebellion, the voice of the eternal God had not been silenced. It is a persistent theological error to assume that God speaks exclusively to the visibly holy, the ceremonially clean, or the officially appointed clergy. But Enoch's life stands as a testament, a direct assault on that comfortable myth. He was born into a line historically marked by a curse, raised within a metropolis engineered on defiance, and tutored by men who had never knelt before an altar. Yet, despite all these disqualifiers, he was lifted higher into the presence of the divine than any man had ever ascended. So what, then, does this unprecedented story communicate to us? It loudly proclaims that heaven deliberately bypasses the predictable choice, that those forgotten souls who kneel in quiet, persistent secret may be the very ones entrusted with the indelible scrolls of eternity. God is still, perpetually, seeking a son or daughter of the outcast line of Cain who possesses the audacious courage to truly pray. And the universal truth remains. When one mortal soul genuinely seeks the unseen, the vast, mysterious unseen immediately comes seeking them in return. Don't turn away. For the beginning of chapter 5 immediately plunges us into the forbidden, terrifying history of the Watchers. We are about to uncover exactly who they were, the profound reasons for their catastrophic fall, and the dark, corrupting knowledge they systematically disseminated among mankind. Their secrets did not merely pollute the early world. They established a dark, operational blueprint that continues to echo in our reality even now. Chapter 5. The Watchers descend. Before the establishment of earthly kings, before the great temples were lifted to the sky, before humanity had fully grasped the scope of its own destiny, they arrived. They did not appear from across a distant sea or emerge from a rival kingdom. They came from above, from the luminous, high realms of heaven, where the celestial stars moved in perfect, terrifying divine precision, and the pure will of God pulsed like a current of white lightning through the very spiritual veins of the angels. They descended. Enoch gave them the designation, the Watchers. In the ancient Aramaic tongue, they were known as the Gregori, which translates simply to, they who watch. At their initial descent, they were not rebels. Their hearts were still focused. They were dispatched with a potent, specific purpose. 200 in number, they were beings of immense power, terrifying radiance, and magnificent, dreadful glory. They came to the newly formed earth to scrupulously observe, to gently guide, to stand sentinel over the fragile beginnings of mankind, helping humanity navigate the complex, early mysteries of creation. They served as heaven's elite emissaries, assigned not to usurp authority or rule over men, but strictly to reveal. And for a season they executed their assigned task with perfection. They instructed men in the profound secrets of the stars, the predictable cycles of the moon, and the subtle healing properties locked within the mountain herbs. They showed humanity how to cultivate the rough earth with agricultural wisdom, how to carefully blend roots to create essential medicines, and how to accurately interpret the momentous signs written across the heavens. Their presence brought clarity, necessary insight, and structural order to a bewildered world. But sacred wisdom, once lodged in hands that become corrupted, can swiftly transform into a devastating weapon. Inevitably, their holy mission began a subtle, fatal drift. The decline started not with aggressive violence or open warfare, but with the slow, burning infiltration of illicit desire. The ancient book of Enoch records this turning point with chilling clarity. And it came to pass that the sons of heaven looked down upon the daughters of men, and saw that they were extraordinarily beautiful. And they lusted not from a safe distance, not in unspoken silence, but with a conscious, calculated resolve. One among their leaders, a magnificent angel named Samjaza, uttered the words no celestial being was ever permitted to speak aloud. Let us collectively choose wives from among the daughters of men, and let us violently beget children with them. At first, the other watchers recoiled and hesitated. They possessed ancient knowledge of the cosmic price. The invisible spiritual boundary they were contemplating crossing was not just a minor infraction. It was a devastating, irreversible act of cosmic treason. But Samjaza, resolute in his desire, swore a binding, eternal oath. And one by one, all 200 angels agreed and joined his covenant of rebellion. What had begun as an assignment of divine wisdom swiftly morphed into an act of mass, strategic seduction. They seized human women, whether through brute angelic force or deceptive, manipulative charm. The precise manner remains shadowed in history. But this catastrophic, unholy union produced an abomination that was never meant to exist. The Nephilim. They were giants, true hybrids, creatures possessing terrifying size but driven by an even greater, insatiable appetite. Their hunger knew no spiritual or physical bounds. A hunger for power, for gratuitous violence, and for the taste of blood. And the Watchers, who had once been noble guardians, shamefully began to finance and feed this emerging empire of monstrosity. They systematically taught humanity secrets far surpassing what God had intended for that fragile, early time. They revealed enchantments and powerful charms, the black art of sorcery, and the twisting patterns of astrology. They unveiled the secrets of arcane alchemy and the cold, deadly specifics of weaponry. They introduced the art of intense seduction and the precise, brutal tools required for organized war. The critical line separating genuine, patient revelation from malicious manipulation had utterly vanished. What heaven had intended to give slowly, through patience and instruction, was now violently forced open and plundered by pride. Knowledge was no longer sacred or conditional. It became a dangerous commodity, a weaponized tool, a searing curse upon the earth. Think deeply about this cosmic betrayal. The same celestial being who once showed early man how to harvest life-giving herbs for healing now taught him the intricate recipes for poison. The same angel who diligently mapped the precise movement of the stars now deliberately twisted their sacred patterns into dark signs used for conjuring demons. The Watchers had not merely stumbled and fallen. They had executed a planned, purposeful descent. And under their influence, the earth began its agonizing unraveling. The Nephilim multiplied with unnatural speed. They did not mature and grow like ordinary men. They consumed like ravenous beasts. They established their dominion with terror, enslaved the populace using their tremendous strength, and corrupted the minds of men with their sophisticated, angelic intellect. They were not mindless monsters. They were the perfect, disastrous fusion of high angelic intelligence and corrupted human flesh. and that synthesis made them the most dangerous entities the world has ever known. They declared themselves kings, ruthless tyrants, and self-proclaimed demigods, and mankind, still primitive and young in its understanding, began the horrifying act of worshipping them. The initial bloodline of rebellion became the bedrock for false divinity, and the world spun violently into chaos. Sacrifices multiplied exponentially. Magic was formalized and institutionalized into religion. Blood rites were ruthlessly demanded. Civilizations rose not around humble altars dedicated to God, but around the blood-soaked thrones of the Nephilim. The vital boundaries established between heaven and earth were violently torn apart. And Enoch observed every agonizing detail. He saw the forbidden arts the angels had taught. He saw the women who were stolen, seduced, and ultimately broken. He saw the children they bore, impossibly tall, frighteningly mighty, and fundamentally monstrous. And he saw the utter devastation they left in their wake. Forests were reduced to ashes. Rivers ran thick and red with blood. Entire tribes of humans vanished without a trace overnight. What had once been guidance issued from heaven was now the precise, terrifying architecture of chaos. And here is the profound question almost no one dares to ask. Why did God permit it? Why didn't he stop the watchers at the instant of their physical descent? Why didn't he instantly seal the sky the very moment illicit lust touched their celestial hearts? The answer is solemn. Because God does not retract freedom, not even for his angels. And when that sacred freedom is misused to inflict cosmic harm, judgment does not delay. It gathers. Enoch was commanded to record it all down. Every treacherous name of every fallen watcher, every dark, forbidden teaching, every new curse unleashed upon mankind. He became heaven's chosen witness, heaven's official historian, and heaven's ultimate whistleblower. He wrote not for the eyes of his generation, but specifically for ours. Because this was not just ancient, forgotten history. The spirits of the watchers, the ones who were judged, bound, and exiled, still profoundly influenced the unseen spiritual realms. The dark technologies they seeded, the destructive ideologies they planted, the unholy lust for power, domination, and hidden knowledge. It all still echoes loudly in the halls of governments, in the sinister secrecy of laboratories, and in the seductive whispers of occult revival. We did not invent darkness. We inherited it. The rebellion of the Watchers was not merely physical. It was deeply theological. It represented the first organized, massive assault on the very image of God residing in man. By corrupting the human bloodline, by violently fusing angel with flesh, they attempted to erase the divine blueprint entirely. It was a war waged not just of flesh and bone, but of destiny itself. Because if man no longer perfectly bore God's image, could God still legitimately redeem him? This was the enemy's master strategy. Not simply to destroy mankind, but to make him structurally and biologically unredeemable. And as the Watchers systematically defiled both the heavens and the earth, something truly terrible was born. Something the world was utterly unprepared to face. They were giants in imposing stature, but pure monsters in unholy nature. In Chapter 6, we finally meet the Nephilim, the hybrid offspring of angels and human women, and uncover the terrifying process of how their birth completely rewired the human story forever. Chapter 6. Birth of the Nephilim. There are specific stories the ancient world flatly refused to forget. Not because they were beautiful or inspiring, but because they were indescribably terrifying. They whispered incessantly of beings who literally towered over the tallest men, whose predatory eyes glowed with a strange internal fire, whose overwhelming strength could effortlessly topple entire walled cities, and whose colossal appetites knew no conceivable end. They were far more than just scary legends. They were far more than simple myths. They were the Nephilim, and their birth constituted the most catastrophic, pivotal turning point in early human history. It began with an utterly unholy union. 200 Watchers, angels specifically assigned to observe, crossed the sacred boundary dividing the divine and the human. They didn't just descend to advise. They seized wives. They deliberately manufactured life outside of God's perfect design. The human women became pregnant, but they bore anything but ordinary children. They grew unnaturally fast. They grew monstrously large. They grew impossibly hungry. The book of Enoch states plainly, "And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when the men of the earth could no longer physically sustain their massive hunger, the giants viciously turned against them and began to devour mankind itself." Let the horror of that statement fully settle in your mind. They didn't just rule by decree. They devoured. These were not simply tall warriors. They were sophisticated hybrids, part celestial fire, part corrupted flesh. They were far too powerful for humanity to ever resist, and far too corrupted by their nature to ever be redeemed. They possessed the keen intellect of angels, the tremendous physical body of men, and the savage heart of something far, far worse. The giants were not just physically big. Their very existence was born of cosmic rebellion. Their presence was a profound insult to heaven, a grotesque distortion of the divine image, a massive, counterfeit creation designed to mock God. Civilization, which had been slowly and painfully rising with early music, rudimentary tools, and agriculture, was violently twisted into a perpetual battlefield. The Nephilim established their kingdoms not through cooperation or law, but through sheer terror. They ruled exclusively by force, not by faith, by sorcery, not by wisdom, by fear, not by love. And humanity bowed before them, not in worshipful reverence, but in abject, total submission. What viable alternative did they have? Who could possibly resist a creature that could lift 10 men with one massive arm and crush an entire village with a single contemptuous whisper? But the Nephilim did not stop at mere domination. They began to ruthlessly experiment. They corrupted the natural order of the animals. They deliberately manipulated the fragile balance of nature. They engineered monstrous offspring, unholy mixtures of beast and man, spirit and flesh. What God had carefully separated at the moment of creation, they violently tried to recombine. This was not mere sin. It was cosmic vandalism on an unimaginable scale. The Nephilim didn't just violate Earth. They declared outright war on the Creator. And what did the human race do in response? They adapted. They adopted the new reality. They began to emulate their new, massive masters. Witchcraft became codified religion. Bloody sacrifice became accepted law. The dangerous, chaotic supernatural became sickeningly normal. People began to seek the Nephilim out, not just out of terror, but out of a perverse fascination. They craved their power, their secret knowledge, their terrible favor. And in doing so, mankind lost its sacred self. The giants may have forcefully ruled, but it was man who ultimately welcomed them. Enoch watched this unfolding agony with profound anguish. He saw entire cities aggressively raised in honor of the Nephilim, temples heavily adorned with their monstrous images, and mournful songs composed to glorify their brutal strength. He saw the initiation of human sacrifice, not as an abhorrent crime, but as an institutionalized ritual. Parents offered their own children to the fire in the vain hope that the giants would bless their crops. Human blood was no longer considered sacred. It became a required, necessary currency. And the watchers, once assigned to watch over, now watched no more. They taught even deeper, darker secrets. Enchantments that could effectively alter the human mind. Charms designed to bend the will of others. Spells to communicate with the dead. They successfully installed themselves as gods in the eyes of the people. But heaven saw something entirely different. Heaven saw corruption multiplied and perfected. Imagine the unbearable weight upon Enoch, a man not born into visible righteousness, but suddenly tasked with carrying the crushing burden of divine revelation. He saw the world violently unraveling. He saw divine beings criminally abuse their celestial power. He saw the innocent crushed under the mighty feet of hybrid tyrants. And yet, still he wrote. He documented every single fallen angel, every forbidden art, every destructive act of transgression. He became the recorder of a creation that had gone fundamentally rogue. And what he so meticulously recorded became heaven's irrefutable evidence. But the story grows darker still. The Nephilim, in their arrogance, eventually turned on each other. Giants do not share a throne. They devour those who sit upon it. Terrible wars erupted between rival Nephilim clans. Tens of thousands of human lives were lost. Entire cities vanished from the map without a trace. The earth, once lush and vibrant, began to crack and groan under the sheer weight of spilled blood, and the skies themselves began to stir with ominous signs. Lightning flashed without rain, thunder rumbled without storms. It was a terrifying sign that heaven was no longer merely watching, but preparing to move. According to Enoch, the Nephilim even audaciously challenged God himself. They truly believed they could not be destroyed, that their hybrid blood was too divine to be judged, that their imposing size made them inherently immortal. They were terribly wrong because the divine judge had witnessed enough. The silent cries of the oppressed had finally reached the throne. The earth groaned incessantly beneath their violence. The balance of creation had tipped irreversibly toward total collapse. And so the grim decision was made. A flood was coming. Not a minor storm, not a seasonal event, but a total reset, a complete reckoning. Because what man had utterly failed to fix, heaven was determined to cleanse. But before the waters fell, Enoch was given one more soul-crushing task: to warn the watchers, to intercede on their behalf, to formally write their petitions and personally deliver them to God. He fulfilled the terrible task. He wept. He begged. But the answer came back, sharp and final like fire. Never again. No forgiveness. No return. Only chains. Only judgment. The watchers would be irrevocably bound. The Nephilim would be utterly destroyed. The earth would be washed clean. The giants believed they were gods. But in the end, they drowned like mortal men. And as the waters began their slow, inevitable rise in Enoch's harrowing visions, he did not just see the destruction of a world. He saw the ultimate, terrible cost of unrestrained rebellion, of corrupted creation, of worshipping destructive power instead of the one who graciously gave it. In chapter 7, the storm begins to gather its force. Enoch is shown the specific judgment that will wipe out the world, but also the thin, miraculous thread of hope that still remains. One righteous man, one massive ark, one sacred promise, and the fire of justice that will never, ever be silenced. Chapter 7. Visions of Judgment. Not all divine revelation is glorious or uplifting. Some visions leave the soul shaking uncontrollably. Some revealed truths are simply too heavy for joy. And when Enoch was taken up again, when his spirit was meticulously lifted from the dust of earth into the austere halls of heaven, what he witnessed was not blazing splendor. It was deep, profound sorrow. It was not deafening thunder or consuming flame or divine shouting. It was the vast, aching grief of God. He stood once more in the midst of the angelic watchers, but this time they were not radiant. They were weeping openly. Heaven itself mourned. For the creation that had once been declared fundamentally good was now corrupted to its very core. And God, whose patience is infinitely long, had finally reached the inevitable hour of decision. Enoch was shown the impending flood before a single drop of rain had even fallen. He saw it not as a simple weather event, but as a deliberate reversal, a divine unwinding, a cleansing required not with fire, but with waters deep and ancient. The fountains of the great deep would violently break open. The skies would scream with torrential rain. Mighty mountains would vanish beneath roaring, swallowing oceans. Cities would disappear as completely as if they had never existed. The giants, those mighty Nephilim who had ruled men like gods, would claw, scream, and run. But they would ultimately drown. Not because they were weak, but because they were irrevocably wrong. And Enoch saw the profound pain, not just of man, but of God himself. The flood was not birthed from blind rage. It was born from divine heartbreak. Genesis 6 verse 6 echoes this shattering truth. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. That single line should absolutely shatter our understanding. The Creator grieved not because he failed in his work, but because we utterly failed him. We violently turned beauty into blood, sacred freedom into defiance, and heaven's benevolent gifts into earth's heavy chains. And as Enoch watched the judgment tragically unfold in his vision, he began to understand that this was not mere destruction. It was a complete reset. But not for everyone, because the fallen ones, the watchers, still watched, bound to the earth, unable to ascend, utterly cast from the glory they once carried. They watched as their own children, the Nephilim, were marked for total annihilation. And in a terrifying moment of last-ditch desperation, they turned to the one man who had intimately seen both realms. They begged Enoch to intercede on their behalf. They pleaded, "Petition the Most High. We are sincerely sorry. We will never do this again. Tell him to forgive us, to spare our sons, to release us from this terrifying sentence." And for a flickering moment, Enoch hesitated. He had seen their horrific crimes. He had watched their methodical corruption. He had personally recorded every forbidden act. But he had also seen their profound regret, their primal terror, their agonizing loss. So he undertook the unthinkable. He agreed. Enoch, son of Cain's cursed line, citizen of the first city, a man born under the shadow of rebellion, became the official intercessor of angels. He fasted severely. He wept uncontrollably. He ascended in spirit to the highest heavens. And he wrote. He wrote their petitions, their pitiful cries, their names, their reasons, their desperate hopes. And he delivered them, scroll clutched in hand, to the throne of the Most High. But heaven was devastatingly silent. Then the final voice came, not angry, not thunderous, but definitive and final. Their petitions will not be heard. The words shattered the absolute stillness of the divine realm. God had decided. The line had been crossed beyond repair. Forgiveness was simply not theirs to receive. These were not frail mortals. These were once luminous sons of heaven. They had gazed upon the face of glory, and they had consciously chosen lust and rebellion instead. There is a season for boundless mercy, and there is a time when judgment must finally fall, because mercy that is repeatedly ignored inevitably becomes mercy that is utterly abused. Enoch, trembling uncontrollably, returned with the final, terrible message. He delivered it to the watchers, who were now pale, bound, and hopeless. And what transpired next has echoed across centuries of angelology, theology, and prophecy. The watchers screamed, not in angry rage, but in utter horror and despair. They knew their final fate was sealed. They fell upon their faces. They begged again, but heaven had spoken its last word. The judgment was sealed forever. They would be bound deep within the earth in dark, impenetrable chains until the final judgment, until the absolute end of days. And Enoch, he had crossed a threshold that no man before him had ever dared to cross. He had stood directly between the divine and the damned. He had written scrolls not just for the attention of men, but for the very angels. Enoch became a unique scribe positioned between worlds. No longer just a mere witness. He was now a sworn messenger, a courier of final justice, a meticulous recorder of eternity. Heaven had deliberately chosen a man not of priestly bloodline, not of established prophetic heritage, but a simple man who possessed the courage to listen. And because he listened fully, he was shown everything. What remains most haunting is not just that the flood was coming, but that the world below was utterly unaware. People were marrying, trading, dancing, building grand structures, mistakenly thinking the Nephilim would rule forever, that their cities would always stand, that the earth would eternally be theirs. But Enoch had seen the terrifying end, and he wrote it down for all time. And even in the terrible judgment, there remained a whisper of enduring hope. In the midst of rising, consuming waters, God had chosen one man, one specific descendant, a righteous man. His name was Noah, and through him the story would not terminate. It would powerfully begin again. The flood was not the conclusion. It was the violent doorway to the remnant. And as Enoch closed his final scroll, as he sealed the terrible words given from heaven, he knew deeply in his soul that he had not just recorded history. He had recorded the ultimate warning, because the pattern of rebellion would certainly return. The chaos would rise again, and the next time the fire would surely fall. In chapter 8, Enoch is commissioned to write not only for his current generation, but specifically for the final one. The profound prophecies hidden within his ancient scrolls reveal secrets of the Messiah, the final cosmic judgment, and the ultimate destiny of the righteous. What the formalized church somehow forgot, Enoch accurately remembered. Chapter 8. The book that should not exist. History is notoriously written by the victors, but prophecy is written by the dedicated witnesses. And Enoch, the humble son of Cain's line, the man literally caught between the worlds of heaven and earth, was not just a witness to one massive rebellion. He was a witness to total, sweeping revelation. The visions he received were not primarily for his own comfort, nor even for the benefit of his doomed generation. They were explicitly written for you, the reader, in the final days. And so he wrote. He wrote in trembling, lines in ink and memory, in symbols passed down by celestial messengers. He was not a singer of soft verse or a weaver of comforting fables. His pen struck with the weight of divine authority. He wrote not poems, but solemn judgment. He didn't engage in philosophical speculation or theological debate. He wrote precisely what his transdimensional eyes beheld. He captured vivid visions of the archangels, of heavenly thrones burning with light, of the legions of watchers held captive in chains beneath the earth, and of the consuming fire yet to be unleashed upon a corrupted world. And perhaps most astonishingly, he penned the first clear portrait of the one who was destined to come. Enoch prophesied the Messiah, the Anointed One, thousands of years before the star rested over Bethlehem. He saw a figure radiating power, identified distinctly as the Son of Man, riding triumphantly on the clouds of heaven, seated beside the Ancient of Days, receiving everlasting judgment, undeniable glory, and universal dominion. This exact vision, this precise heavenly scene, reappears dramatically in the canonical book of Daniel, and then again, foundational to the narratives of the Gospels. But Enoch was the one who recorded it first. Here is a direct quote from 1 Enoch 46:1-2, capturing that primal vision. There I beheld one who had a head like a white wool. With him was another whose countenance resembled that of man. This is the Son of Man who will bring righteousness to the earth. Enoch saw the Messiah not simply as a distant, gentle Savior, but primarily as the ultimate judge of all creation. He saw the certainty of his second coming, witnessing the wicked trembling and dissolving before his majesty. He saw the redeemed, the righteous, shining with the pure, unblemished light of the sun itself. He even foresaw the ultimate reversal of decay, the resurrection of the just, the opening of graves, and the subsequent rising of the saints. Centuries before the call of Abraham, before the giving of the law through Moses, before the founding of Israel as a nation, Enoch was already preaching the essential message of the gospel, a revelation so ancient, yet so complete. Yet, the institutional church would later systematically label his writings as apocrypha. Scholars, eager to refine and consolidate doctrine, would dismiss it as non-canonical, and vast empires would collaborate in a deliberate, centuries-long effort to erase it entirely from human memory. Why such monumental effort to silence one book? Because it simply said too much. Enoch's writings were not merely containing complex prophecy. They held the key to origins, not the origin of creation, which was known, but the terrifying origin of corruption itself. He meticulously explained the source of demons, the initial catastrophic rebellion of the Watchers, the fallen angels, and the subsequent rise of sorcery, forbidden astrology, and all forms of unsanctioned, destructive knowledge. He provided the very names of the key angels who orchestrated the fall. Crucially, he traced the lineage of evil, not back to the fragile error of man in the garden, but to a vast celestial rebellion that fundamentally predated the Great Flood and infected the earth from above. This book was deemed profoundly dangerous precisely because it explicitly explained what evil actually is and definitively identified who introduced it into the human domain. It brutally removed the comfortable illusion that evil is merely psychological dysfunction or poor human error. It revealed, starkly and without compromise, that Earth has been a clandestine battlefield since before recorded history, and that humanity was never the sole player on this cosmic stage. But Enoch's scope was not limited to naming the darkness. He also meticulously traced the line of light. He described in vivid detail the glorious destiny awaiting the righteous, those rare individuals who choose to walk humbly, seek truth relentlessly, and endure profound injustice for the sake of the coming eternal kingdom. He spoke plainly of the final, sweeping judgment, of avenging angels wielding celestial swords, of the definitive book of life, of earthly thrones being violently overturned, and of the hidden, forgotten ones being raised to unimaginable glory. Reflective moment. He wrote with a terrible urgency because the weight and magnitude of the visions were literally burning within his bones. These were not mythical stories designed to comfort or entertain. They were not simplistic fables meant to teach morality. They were, he insisted, first-hand reports dictated from the other side of the veil, from the very courts of heaven. This is not myth. This is sacred, transmitted memory. And this purpose was communicated to him explicitly. In the book of Enoch, the angel Uriel is recorded as saying to him, "Enoch, write all these things which I have made known to you for the generations to come, not for this generation, but for a distant one that will live in the days of tribulation." Let that profound command settle for a moment. Enoch was explicitly told he was not documenting history for his contemporaries. He was writing a survival guide for a time still far ahead. A time perhaps exactly like ours. A world where the forbidden teachings of the Watchers have insidiously returned. Where what was once labeled sorcery is now packaged and presented as science. Where the concept of angels is openly mocked or psychologized away. Where the old giants are no longer physical monstrosities, but cultural, corporate, and systemic structures of oppression. The world Enoch foresaw in his terrifying visions is the world we inhabit today. That is the fundamental reason why the book was subjected to a coordinated ban. Because it did not just recount ancient stories. It delivered future truth. So what, then, was the fate of this critical, dangerous book? Why is it virtually absent from modern sermons? Why was it deliberately excised from the standard Protestant and Catholic Bibles? Because over the span of centuries, powerful ecclesiastical men, the emerging gatekeepers of religious authority, concluded that its message was simply too potent, too uncontrollable. It was not fringe literature. It was quoted by the earliest Christian leaders, including Jude, who was the very brother of Jesus. Jude writes, "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones." That line is lifted directly from Enoch, word for word. Even the Apostle Peter alludes clearly to Enoch's terrifying tales of fallen angels bound in eternal chains. The early church fathers respected and referenced it. It was widely circulated, deeply trusted, and then, slowly, deliberately, it vanished. It wasn't lost by some historical accident or neglect. It was intentionally buried on purpose. Council after council debated the contents of the canon, and time and again, they strategically chose to leave Enoch out. Why? Because its depth could not be controlled by human institutions. It spoke openly of too many realms, too many unseen beings, and contained far too much critical knowledge that existed entirely outside the jurisdiction of the emerging priesthood. It empowered the common man to look behind the ecclesiastical curtain. It named specific entities and unveiled wicked systems. And most alarmingly, it proclaimed a sovereign Messiah who could not be owned, contained, or claimed by any one nation, tribe, or single religious system. Only one church, the steadfast Ethiopian Orthodox Church, dared to preserve it in its entirety. For well over 1,000 years, they guarded the Book of Enoch as true scripture. And then, in the 18th century, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce finally brought copies of it back to Europe. Predictably, most Western scholars immediately dismissed it, laughed at it, and universally labeled it an obvious forgery, until the 20th century, when irrefutable fragments of the text were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, hidden in desert caves that had been sealed for 2 millennia. The very book they swore never existed was discovered, preserved, and matching the text, word for undeniable word. The Book of Enoch was not fabricated by medieval minds. It was preserved for now, for you, for this generation. So the real question is not whether the book itself is authentic. The terrifying question is whether you are ready for the magnitude of what it reveals. Because if Enoch was correct in his uncompromising worldview, then the war we face today is neither modern nor new. The enemies we truly fight are not primarily of flesh and blood. And the victory we desperately await was meticulously written into the fabric of creation long before we ever drew breath. In chapter 9, we follow Enoch as he is taken once more, not into the halls of final judgment this time, but into the soaring, radiant halls of eternal redemption. There he witnesses the glorious promise of the Messiah unfold completely, not only for his own ancient time, but for the definitive end of time. And what he saw might well be the most explosive and paradigm-shifting prophecy ever recorded. Chapter 9. The man who did not die. Every single human being in history has walked the road that ends in dust. Every revered prophet, every king, every philosopher has eventually returned to the ground. Even the greatest saints of the church eventually fell silent in the cold confines of the grave. But not Enoch, because one day, God himself whispered a drastically different, unprecedented ending into human history. Genesis 5 verse 24 reads, "And Enoch walked with God. And he was not, for God took him. No funeral was held, no grave was dug, no tombstone was ever erected." Enoch did not suffer death. He had completed his commission. He had seen the judgment, he had recorded the visions, he had stood as a mediator between the highest angels and fallen men. But there still remained one final, staggering mystery left to unfold. The mystery of translation. Not translation of language from one tongue to another, but the radical translation of existence itself. Enoch would not pass through death's shadowy gate. He would bypass it entirely. He would leave the corrupted earth, not in inevitable decay, but wrapped in unearned glory. God had promised him, "You will not see death." And when the voice of heaven speaks such a decree, history instantly rewrites itself. One ordinary day, as the world turned on its axis like any other, as ancient cities bustled with life and men laughed, utterly unaware of the profound spiritual darkness surrounding them, a great silence fell. There was a subtle, unexplainable shift in the atmosphere, a quiet cosmic rearrangement. Enoch walked, as was his deeply ingrained habit, toward solitude, toward the sacred place where the veil between realms grew thin, where the distant stars felt suddenly closer than the clamor of the cities. And then, without fanfare, he was gone. He was taken, body and soul, translated directly into heaven itself. No blazing chariots of fire, no dramatic, visible whirlwind, no simple grave marker, only an echoing, permanent absence. To the world he had known, he had simply vanished. To heaven, he had spectacularly arrived. Enoch became the undisputed first fruits of a different destiny. He was a human being, still clothed in flesh, yet found worthy of eternal, unmediated presence with the divine. He didn't merely escape the fear of death. He stepped immediately into another function entirely, a new, vital role in the heavens. He did not rest. He did not retire to celestial leisure. He did not simply float on clouds in eternal contemplation. He continued his work. The Book of Enoch and other ancient writings describe him being profoundly transformed, clothed in garments of radiant light, seated among the holiest ones, and entrusted with sacred scrolls in a station few mortals could ever imagine. He became the chief scribe in the very courts of God. The man who once scribbled prophecy by the flickering light of an oil lamp was now recording the decrees of eternity, working directly within the halls of the Most High. Enoch's pen never truly stopped moving. It simply changed realms and purposes. And this singular event changes everything we understand about the early narrative of humanity. Because in Enoch, we see the complete reversal of Cain's terrible curse. Enoch came from a cursed line, born into a world defined by burgeoning rebellion and increasing violence. Yet, he was not claimed by the prevailing judgment. He was claimed by uncompromising intimacy. He consistently walked with God, and God found that he could not bear to let him go back to the dust. It wasn't Enoch who finally chose to leave Earth. It was Earth itself, now too corrupt, that could no longer hold him. But that raises a profound, unsettling question. Why Enoch? Why was he taken, and not the righteous Noah, who saved the human race? Why him and not Abraham, the father of faith, or Moses, the lawgiver, or David, the king, or Isaiah, the towering prophet? What specific thing did Enoch possess that rendered him untouchable by death's icy grip? The answer, simultaneously simple and terrifyingly challenging, is this: he believed and he walked. Hebrews 11 verse 5 confirms it. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him. He didn't build a magnificent ark. He didn't dramatically part a sea or conquer great armies. He didn't lead a nation out of bondage. He simply and consistently walked with God day after day, step by steady step, closer and closer, until the fragile line between temporary time and eternal existence blurred completely, and God simply said, "Come." Enoch did not escape death by works or achievement. He escaped it entirely by communion, by persistent intimacy. And yet, his work, even in heaven, was not finished. Jewish and early Christian traditions widely suggest that Enoch continues to play an active, vital role in the unfolding drama of salvation. He is widely believed to stand in the heavenly council, acting as an eternal witness to both the great fall and the promised restoration. In some esoteric traditions, he is elevated to the archangel Metatron, the chief scribe of God, a towering being of pure light, the heavenly archivist who meticulously records every deed, every tear-filled prayer, and every silent cry for justice emanating from the earth below. Now, whether this specific identity is interpreted as literal or profoundly symbolic, the underlying pattern remains the same. Enoch's story did not conclude when he vanished from view. It radically expanded. He left the earth, but he never left human history. And here is where the mystery deepens its hold. Enoch's very absence became his most powerful, most enduring message. Because where there should have been a crumbling grave, there was only an inexplicable gap, a profound, unanswered question, a silence that speaks infinitely louder than any human words. Theologians have long and accurately stated, in Enoch, we perceive the clear shadow of what is infallibly to come. Because one day, a vastly different man would rise. Not a man who would be taken up to avoid death, but a divine man who would willingly descend. Not ascending from earth to heaven, but descending from heaven to earth. The Son of Man, the exact figure Enoch saw in his primal visions, would walk precisely where Enoch once walked. But instead of sidestepping death, he would confront it head-on, facing its full force and utterly destroying its power from the inside out. And because of that ultimate, decisive victory, Enoch's path is no longer unique to him alone. It is now established as a prototype, a prophetic blueprint of what is supremely possible for all who choose to walk with God in intimacy. Enoch was the first man to definitively beat death, but the scriptures promise he absolutely will not be the last. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. This is not merely spiritual fantasy or wishful thinking. This is the profound legacy of Enoch. So what tangible implication does this hold for us here and now? In a world increasingly drowning in the preoccupation with death, utterly obsessed with decay, and gripped by a paralyzing fear of the grave, Enoch whispers a clear, different path. That path is achieved not through forced escape or magical power, but through persistent closeness, not through striving for spiritual power, but through simply maintaining God's presence. You do not need to be born perfect or possess an immaculate, righteous bloodline. You do not even require an official ecclesiastical title. You just need to choose to walk day by day, step by steady step, with the one who definitively knows the way home. Enoch didn't find immortality through some cosmic loophole. He found God, and that, it turns out, was utterly enough. In the end, the greatest miracle in Enoch's singular life was not that he escaped death's grasp. It was the breathtaking fact that heaven actually made permanent room for a man born into rebellion, a man who consistently chose to listen to the eternal voice, a man who deliberately walked away from the deafening noise of the city and deep into the quiet, all-encompassing voice of the eternal. He walked with God, and then he just kept walking. In chapter 10, we now follow the strange and turbulent fate of the book of Enoch after his departure, tracing its journey from sacred text to forbidden scroll. We uncover the historical truth of how a book once quoted and revered by the apostles was brutally banned by the emerging institutional church, and why its enforced disappearance may well constitute the greatest, most extensive theological cover-up in the entire history of Christianity. Chapter 10. The Church bans the book. Enoch himself never experienced death, but his book was intentionally killed, buried, forgotten, and meticulously erased, not by avowed atheists or hardened skeptics, but by the very religious institution that had once enthusiastically cherished its contents. In the first pivotal centuries of the Church's existence, the Book of Enoch was not fringe literature. It was not obscure or esoteric. It was deeply revered and widely accepted. The early followers of Jesus, especially those closest to the immediate circle of the apostles, studied it intensely, quoted it freely, and read it aloud reverently in their communal gatherings of faith. To them, Enoch's visionary insights were not strange or peripheral. They were essential pieces of the puzzle, helping to frame and contextualize both the current events of Christ's ministry and the cataclysmic, prophetic events that were quickly approaching. Before the emergence of the Book of Revelation as we know it, there was the comprehensive vision of Enoch. You don't have to take my interpretation for it. Open the New Testament, and you will find Enoch's unmistakable fingerprints clearly embedded within the text. Jude 1 verses 14 to 15 delivers a stunning confirmation. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all." That is not a subtle metaphor or a gentle allusion. That is a direct, word-for-word quote lifted straight from the Book of Enoch. It was not referenced, not paraphrased, but quoted verbatim as authoritative prophecy. And it wasn't just Jude. The Apostle Peter also directly echoes Enoch's distinct teachings in 2 Peter 2 verse 4 when he writes, "God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into chains of darkness to be held for judgment." That precise concept, fallen, sinful angels bound tightly in Tartarus, the deepest hell, does not appear anywhere in the Hebrew Old Testament canon. It originates straight and unapologetically from Enoch's detailed writings. The apostles did not just know the Book of Enoch. They fundamentally believed it and treated it not as fictional curiosity, but as prophetic foundation. So what caused the catastrophic change? The answer is as deeply uncomfortable as it is profoundly revealing. The Book of Enoch was not rejected because it was found to lack truth or suffer from theological error. It was rejected and suppressed because it held too much truth, too much detail regarding angelology, too much raw, unsettling apocalyptic vision, and critically, too much spiritual power directly accessible to the common person. As the early church grew rapidly in size and political influence, power began to dangerously consolidate. No longer were small, decentralized house churches the true center of faith. Now, powerful bishops presided over vast, wealthy dioceses. Theology inevitably became intertwined with political maneuvering, and with the acquisition of political power came the necessity for organized, widespread theological censorship. The Book of Enoch presented severe, institutional problems for the rising hierarchy. It spoke too openly of fallen angels and their ongoing, malignant influence on human civilization. This complex, chaotic worldview did not fit neatly into the increasingly Roman, institutionalized worldview that sought order and control. It blurred the crucial lines between the natural and the supernatural, making church governance uncomfortable for aspiring empire builders. It fiercely elevated the crucial role of direct, individual revelation. Enoch was neither a professional priest nor a Levite, and yet he freely received direct visions, spoke intimately with high angels, and was ultimately taken into heaven. This radical empowerment of the individual believer was highly dangerous in a system deliberately built upon strict, unwavering hierarchy. It forthrightly foretold the coming of a universal Messiah who would return specifically to judge the rulers of the earth, a category that naturally includes kings, emperors, and eventually, the powerful bishops themselves. You can easily imagine how deeply unsettling that message became once Christianity officially became tied to imperial state power. In a world where the church sought to establish itself as the sole, indispensable gatekeeper of truth, Enoch became an enormous, unacceptable liability. So they buried him, not using physical shovels and dirt, but using the far more effective tools of organized, strategic silence. Council after council met and debated the contents of the biblical canon, and slowly, deliberately, and strategically Enoch was edged out and excluded. This was accomplished not by a dramatic declaration of heresy, and not with the open threat of fire and brimstone, but with something far more effective and less controversial: calculated neglect. By the 4th century, Enoch had virtually vanished from the Western canon. The book that had once profoundly shaped the apostles and fueled the earliest Christian prophecies was now universally dismissed as non-canonical, pseudepigraphical, and unauthorized. But here lies the essential irony. The institutional church didn't truly ban Enoch because they believed it to be false. They banned it because its theology and cosmic scope were entirely outside their control. It was too celestial, too cosmic, too wild, and too decentralized. They could not govern its potent theology. So they effectively silenced the text. And yet Enoch refused to die completely. One church, and only one, preserved its existence: the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. For over 1,600 years, they steadfastly protected the Book of Enoch as true scripture. They copied it faithfully, read it in their liturgies, and preached its contents without apology. Why Ethiopia? Because they existed entirely outside the established Roman and Byzantine power structures. They were not answerable to the political demands of the European councils. They followed a faith lineage handed down from ancient times, tracing their spiritual roots through the legendary Queen of Sheba and down to the Ethiopian eunuch mentioned in the Book of Acts. In the 1700s, European scholars were certain the Book of Enoch had been utterly lost to history. But then, the Scottish explorer James Bruce returned from Ethiopia with multiple, meticulously handwritten copies. Immediately, European theologians dismissed him, mocked his findings, and called the copies folklore, until the year 1947. That year, in the caves near Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And among those thousands of brittle fragments of Enoch were found written in Hebrew, etched onto ancient parchment dated to at least 200 years before Christ. The book they said never existed was found buried in the exact same desert where the prophets once walked. It was not new. It was not forged. It was older than the Gospels themselves. So the question becomes, if this book was so central to the belief system of the early Christians, if it was directly quoted by the chief apostles, if it was diligently copied by the Essenes, that radical apocalyptic community, and if it was preserved for long centuries in Africa, why is it still conspicuously missing from most modern Bibles today? The candid answer is not purely theological. It is overwhelmingly political. The modern biblical canon was formed not simply by humble prayer and spiritual consensus, but by decisive power dynamics. Books that reinforced institutional control were permitted to stay. Books that fundamentally opened minds and decentralized spiritual authority were strategically pushed out. Enoch committed the one thing that religious institutions fear above all else. It taught people how to think in the deep, authoritative language of heaven without ever needing to ask permission from earth. Enoch spoke of angels and demons, of judgment and redemption, of a Messiah and a kingdom not built by human hands. He did not ask permission. He did not wait for canonical approval. He simply wrote what heaven relentlessly showed him. And for that, his book was consigned to the grave. But not forever. It resurfaced. Its urgent message echoes again. And now you have been told the history. So the question is no longer whether the Book of Enoch is historically real and verifiable. The urgent question is, what else have we, the Church, intentionally buried that heaven still remembers and holds sacred? In chapter 11, we travel to the high plateaus of Ethiopia, the last sanctuary of the Book of Enoch, and we uncover how this forgotten, ancient church preserved a forbidden text, and why its unlikely survival may hold the final, essential key to a hidden, imminent prophecy. You absolutely don't want to miss it. Chapter 11. The Ethiopian Secret. While the Western world systematically burned Enoch's words from its emerging canon, while the contentious councils of Europe endlessly debated doctrine, and while powerful empires strategically buried the book beneath overwhelming layers of centralized doctrine and institutional fear, in the rugged highlands of East Africa, a profound secret was faithfully kept. It wasn't guarded by brute military force. It wasn't protected by political treaties. It was preserved entirely by tenacious faith. Nestled high among the imposing mountains, far from the manipulative reach of Rome and Constantinople, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church held aloft a vital torch that the rest of the Christian world had tragically allowed to be extinguished. They did not question the book's authority. They did not ban it. They boldly canonized it. To them, the Book of Enoch was not dubious apocrypha. It was undisputed, sacred scripture. For well over a millennium, it remained firmly enshrined in their sacred canon, read aloud in their liturgies, intensely studied by their priests, and respected by their kings. While the West conveniently forgot, Ethiopia persistently remembered. And this is not merely obscure theological trivia. This history matters immensely because Ethiopia stands as one of the oldest, most continuously Christian nations on earth. Its faith traces directly back to the ministry of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch recorded in the Book of Acts, a man who was baptized and returned home with the gospel centuries before the Emperor Constantine ever dreamed of Christian conversion. Their connection to Jerusalem is even older and deeper, rooted through the legendary visit of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, through ancient traditions concerning the Ark of the Covenant, and through a deep, unbroken Hebraic spiritual lineage. They were not a mere offshoot of European Christianity. They were an original, untamed branch, unbowed by Western reshaping. So when the West made the calculated decision to abandon Enoch, Ethiopia resolutely held him close. His spectacular visions became inextricably woven into their core theology. His prophetic words echoed perpetually in their rock-hewn monasteries. His powerful prophecies fueled their apocalyptic imagination for centuries, keeping them alert. And while Europe debated the nature of angels, Ethiopia remembered their names and their celestial hierarchies. The Book of Enoch did not survive simply by chance in a hidden cave. It lived on, thriving within a people. Enter the 18th century. A curious Scottish explorer named James Bruce arrived in Ethiopia on an expedition, officially searching for the true source of the Nile River. But what he unexpectedly discovered was something infinitely more controversial and paradigm-shifting. He was presented with a manuscript written in Guizi, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia. It was a complete, intact copy of the Book of Enoch. Bruce initially could not believe the significance of what he held. He had been told, like every educated man in Europe, that Enoch was a myth, a lost, utterly unreliable fragment. But here it was, intact, meticulously hand-copied, preserved in a church that had never once let it go. What was systematically banned and erased in the West had flawlessly survived in the East. Bruce managed to bring 3 copies back to Europe, one to Paris, one to Oxford, one to Berlin, and he was met with instantaneous universal derision. Western scholars proclaimed it an obvious forgery. They claimed it held no historical or theological value. They dismissed it entirely as an Ethiopian legend, a harmless theological curiosity at best. No one wanted to believe it was authentic, because if it was real, everything they had strategically removed from the Bible was still alive and demanding attention. But Enoch, as history proves, has a singular way of rising again. In 1947, a group of Bedouin shepherds stumbled into a cave near the Dead Sea. Inside were clay jars, and inside the jars were scrolls, thousands of fragments from many different books, and among them, fragments of the Book of Enoch, written in Hebrew, dating back over 200 years before Christ. The very book James Bruce had carried out of Africa matched, scroll for scroll, the fragments hidden in the desert for more than 2,000 years. It was not folklore. It was ancient, predated the Gospels, predated the major rabbis. It stood alongside Isaiah and Daniel in the minds of the Essenes, the radical apocalyptic community of Qumran. Suddenly, Bruce was not a madman. Ethiopia was not mistaken. The organized church establishment was caught in a moment of undeniable exposure. They hadn't merely preserved scripture. They had curated it, removed what was theologically dangerous, and kept only what was politically safe. But Ethiopia had kept the whole difficult picture. So what does this revelation fundamentally mean? It means the Book of Enoch never truly perished, was never truly gone. It was simply hidden in plain sight, protected in a land the Western theological establishment continuously refused to see as centrally important. High in the African highlands, beneath the imposing shadows of ancient stone churches hewn directly into the mountainsides, The cryptic prophecies of Enoch were faithfully whispered by generations of monks, meticulously preserved by dedicated scribes, fiercely believed by the faithful, and are now, in our time, being dramatically rediscovered by the world at large. This momentous return compels us to confront an unnerving truth. What priceless spiritual or historical knowledge did we otherwise lose? What profound truths have we carelessly dismissed solely because they failed to fit the official sanctioned narrative? What other vital scrolls still lie forgotten, not decaying in desert caves, but safely harbored within cultures we've long chosen to ignore? The greatest, most insidious threat to the revelation of truth is not violent destruction. It is the silent, pervasive chokehold of institutional pride and self-assured dogma. Enoch challenged the prevailing system, not through aggressive attacks or direct confrontation, but by simply revealing a scope of cosmic reality far greater than that system could ever comfortably contain or control. And the Ethiopian Church, untouched, thankfully, by the imperial theology of Rome, had no theological or political reason whatsoever to suppress his writings. They simply kept him. And now, after centuries of dismissal, the world is turning back toward this ancient source. Scholars across disciplines are studying Enoch once more. Theologians are revisiting the complex doctrines of angelology with fresh eyes. Linguists are painstakingly translating the Venerable G's texts, seeing the language and its contents anew. And prophecy-minded believers are experiencing a stunning realization. The crucial key to understanding the end of days was actually written before what we commonly consider the beginning of history. Enoch's prophecies speak vividly of a Messiah who arrives consumed in purifying fire, of watchers who must eventually return to face judgment, and of the righteous who will be resurrected and made to shine with the brilliance of the stars themselves. He peered into the distant future and foresaw a generation, our generation, obsessed with absolute power, enslaved to technology, seduced by sophisticated false gods, and defined by fragmented, hybrid identities. Does that sound eerily familiar? Perhaps now, with chilling clarity, we can finally grasp the profound reason why this book had to be removed from the public discourse. It was not merely speaking to the ancient world of giants and fallen angels. It speaks directly, urgently, and judgmentally to ours. Enoch's powerful voice was strategically silenced in the West precisely so that it could be perfectly preserved in the East, held in readiness for such a time as this moment of global crisis and confusion. The Ethiopian Church never once claimed to be the self-appointed guardian of cosmic secrets. They merely and humbly kept what they were entrusted with. And maybe that is the ultimate reason they were chosen, because sometimes in the grand narrative of history, God chooses not to trust the arrogant and the powerful, but instead the simple and the faithful. In Chapter 12, we trace the compelling historical path of how the rediscovery of Enoch's foundational book is actively reshaping modern theology, redirecting prophecy studies, and providing new context for spiritual warfare, a continuous line stretching from an ancient scroll directly to our end-time revelation. What if Enoch's return is not merely a fascinating archaeological event, but a deeply significant prophetic one? What if this is more than just history recovered? What if it is an urgent, screaming alarm? Chapter 12. Enoch's legacy in three religions. Certain names in history echo powerfully through the halls of temples. Others are meticulously carved into monumental stone. Still others vanish entirely from the public memory, yet miraculously survive in the deepest shadows, in the dusty corners of ancient scrolls, among ruins long forgotten, and within the hushed words of whispered prophecy. Enoch is emphatically that kind of name. He was never crowned as a king. He never founded a nation or built a shining city. He never led an army to victory. And yet, he lives dynamically within three massive world religions, weaving a luminous thread through their deepest and most guarded mysteries. He was not successfully erased. He was, in fact, preserved in profound secrecy. In Judaism, Enoch occupies a unique place defined by both awe and silence. The core Hebrew scriptures, the Tanakh, mention him only fleetingly, a few brief lines in Genesis, describing a mysterious, immediate vanishing in chapter 5. But in the vibrant intellectual explosion of Second Temple Judaism, the perspective changes dramatically. Writings unearthed from Qumran, the iconic Dead Sea Scrolls, reveal that many influential Jewish sects revered Enoch as the premier scribe of heaven, a prophet without peer, and a cosmic traveler. He was not just celebrated as a righteous man. He was the man who saw the inner mechanics of creation, charted the precise calendar of the stars, and foretold the devastating punishment of the fallen angels, the central theme of the Book of the Watchers. The first major section of 1st Enoch became absolutely central to Jewish apocalyptic thought. Without Enoch's framework, the fiery visions of Daniel, the militaristic war scrolls found at Qumran, and the intricate angelic hierarchies later developed in Jewish mysticism might never have cohered or taken definitive shape. Enoch, therefore, shaped the unseen foundational framework of Judaism, the profound truths that were consistently whispered but seldom, if ever, shouted aloud. In Christianity, Enoch is far more than a historical figure. He is a divine prototype. He was the first human being to be taken up, the first to bypass the curse of physical death entirely, the first to walk so closely with God that he simply ceased to be found among mortals. In doing so, he becomes the profound shadow of Christ's later ascension, the established pattern of the rapture event, and the prophetic forerunner of glorified flesh. The canonical book of Jude quotes him directly. The Apostle Peter clearly echoes his warnings. The monumental book of Revelation vividly mirrors his grand, celestial visions. Stars falling from the sky, heavenly thrones being established, great books being opened for judgment, and cosmic judgment descending upon the earth. But even more significantly, early foundational Christian thinkers like Tertullian, Irenaeus, and Justin Martyr frequently referenced Enoch's writings. They did not treat them as mere mythology or interesting folklore. They treated them as essential context, the necessary detailed background for truly understanding the pivotal coming of the Son of Man. Enoch didn't just generally point toward Jesus. He described him, his power, his judgment, his mission 2,000 years before the manger in Bethlehem. His description of the Son of Man was not simple poetry. It was specific, detailed prophecy. The Messiah Enoch saw was not a gentle lamb in a field. He was an eternal king in the sky, riding forth with legions of holy ones, judging the wicked, and dramatically restoring the righteous. This powerful, awe-inspiring image would become the very bedrock of the Christian apocalyptic imagination, influencing everyone from the desert monks of ancient Egypt to the Protestant reformers of Europe, and from today's persecuted underground churches to the fervent end-time believers waiting now. In Islam, Enoch is revered as Idris, a prophet explicitly mentioned in the Quran. The Quran states, Surah 19:56, 57, and mention Idris in the book. Indeed, he was a man of truth and a prophet, and we raised him to a high station. Muslim scholars have long debated the precise identity of Idris, but many of the most respected classical commentators, including Al-Tabari, Ibn Kathir, and others, confidently identify him directly with the biblical Enoch. According to widely held Islamic tradition, Idris was the first human to write with a pen, the first to seriously study the stars and cosmic movements, and the first to possess a true, systematic understanding of divine signs. And mirroring the accounts in the Bible, Idris never died a conventional death. In some powerful traditions, he even ascended through the 7 heavens, meeting the highest angels, being taught the ultimate cosmic mysteries, and witnessing the astonishing structure of the cosmos firsthand. Does that sound familiar? Because it is unequivocally the same man. Enoch in Islam is not a mere relic of the past. He is celebrated as a key prophet of knowledge, the divine gatekeeper of the heavens. Even within the specialized Islamic mystical tradition of Sufism, Enoch/Idris is closely associated with divine wisdom, the principle of cosmic harmony, and the inner, hidden path to ultimate truth. He is considered one of the very few individuals who achieved a miraj, a spiritual ascension, of the magnitude of the Prophet Muhammad's, but preceding it by millennia. What is the deep, underlying meaning of this universal recognition? It means that across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, we discover a singular, persistent thread. A man taken before his natural time who saw beyond the temporal veil, who dared to write down what others were too afraid to utter. They may never agree on all of their theological doctrines, but astonishingly, they agree on Enoch. Not in the major headlines, nor in the central canon debates, but preserved in the shadows, within the mystical corridors, across the ancient scrolls, the sacred surahs, and the lost Gospels. He never became the outward face of organized religion, but he quietly, definitively, became its internal spine. So, the essential question must be asked: why would three of the world's largest, often mutually antagonistic faiths, all maintain such a deep, silent reverence for the exact same man? Why does his name inexorably resurface again and again in the specific context of ultimate judgment, glorious redemption, and the catastrophic end of days? Because Enoch is not merely a fascinating story. He is a divine signal, a stark warning to the wicked, an enduring comfort to the righteous, and a powerful testimony that there are profound things we, as humanity, have chosen to forget, yet that heaven still vividly remembers. Enoch's expansive legacy was never confined to one religion, precisely because his critical message was never confined to one singular era. He speaks to all peoples, not from the high pulpits of the established church, but from the depths of forgotten scrolls, through persistent whispers, from terrifying visions, and from the mouths of later prophets who walked his same challenging path and echoed his same heavy burden. And now, at the apparent climax of history, his book has returned, not as heresy to be feared, not as myth to be ignored, but as irrefutable testimony. Jews are studying it. Christians are quoting it. Muslims are tracing its powerful origins. The one who was deliberately forgotten is, at last, being remembered again. Enoch never died, and neither did his potent message. Across continents, across widely varying creeds, his prophetic voice stretches out like a golden, unbreakable thread through the immense fabric of divine history, unbending, undeniable, and yet unfinished. Because the original prophecies of Enoch were not just about the ancient past. They were intensely focused on a final return, a future judgment that is yet to come, and a transcendent kingdom not built by human hands. In chapter 13, we prepare to explore that final, central mystery. Enoch's ultimate vision of the Last Judgment, the powerful return of the Son of Man, and what those events mean for every one of us alive today. Because the book, we now realize, is not closed, and the scroll has not yet been fully unsealed. Chapter 13. What have we lost? Why exactly did we lose this essential story? It was once routinely whispered in desert caves, quoted directly by the apostles of Christ, and carried forward by generations of true prophets. It survived the collapse of powerful empires. It was chanted in remote monasteries, simultaneously feared by theological councils, and eventually buried in dust by fearful scribes. And now, centuries later, it miraculously returns. But the most challenging question remains, not simply why it was historically lost, but fundamentally what was lost when we carelessly let it go. When the Book of Enoch was deliberately pushed aside and omitted, we lost far more than a single ancient manuscript. We lost a detailed vision of the structure of heaven, a crucial warning concerning pervasive corruption, a precise map of the angelic rebellion that preceded the flood, and an unfiltered lens into the uncompromising justice of God, all delivered before Noah, before Moses, before the revelation at Sinai. We lost the original, uncorrupted blueprint of divine judgment. We lost a man who saw what others would not dare to see and possessed the moral courage to write it all down. We lost a vital, active connection between two distinct worlds, between mortal dust and eternal, consuming fire. Why was Enoch forgotten, marginalized, and effectively erased? Because he simply saw too much. He saw the profound sins of the highest angels, the seemingly inevitable rise of powerful human empires, the eventual fall of kings, the unyielding judgment of heaven, and the horrifying end of days. He spoke of silent stars that keep a record of our deeds, of a Son of Man who would one day judge the mightiest on earth, and of a devastating flood that would wipe out a world that had become utterly drunk on unbridled violence and corrosive pride. He saw that the greatest existential threat to humanity was not physical death, but the collective act of forgetting who we were divinely meant to be. He wasn't banned from the canon because he lied or fabricated stories. He was banned because he saw the overwhelming, uncomfortable truth too clearly for the convenience of the powerful. So, let us now ask the truly forbidden question. Is it entirely possible that the essential truth we desperately seek was never actually gone, only meticulously hidden? hidden away in ancient scrolls that they arbitrarily labeled heresy, hidden within remote churches that the self-satisfied West never bothered to enter, hidden deep within complex symbols, long-forgotten languages, and powerful prophecies patiently waiting to be unearthed, not by detached archaeologists, but by the genuinely spiritually hungry. Maybe we didn't lose Enoch at all. Maybe we just willfully stopped listening. How many fearless prophets have we systematically silenced throughout history because their stark words made us deeply uncomfortable? How many crucial warnings have we casually ignored because they originated from the margins, the periphery, or the voices of the downtrodden? And how many critical truths are still buried and suppressed today simply because they cannot be conveniently controlled or monetized by the current system? The world Enoch described, a landscape populated by spiritual giants, rampant corruption, violently fallen leaders, and seduction by forbidden knowledge, may sound impossibly ancient, but look again at our modern age. Aren't we still desperately building technological towers reaching toward a synthetic heaven? Aren't we still being tragically seduced by raw power cleverly disguised as superior wisdom? Aren't there still prophetic voices crying desperately in the spiritual wilderness that we routinely mock, aggressively suppress, or simply scroll past on our screens? Enoch's world never truly left us. It simply shed its old skin and changed its costume. You have now heard the shocking details of what they buried. Now you must urgently ask yourself, what else, right now, is still buried and waiting? To the older generation, this concluding message is especially and pointedly for you. You have witnessed the world transform at dizzying speed. You've watched foundational truths become fleeting trends and genuine reverence dissolve into shallow entertainment. But the powerful story of Enoch is your ultimate reminder. Not everything that is ancient is, by definition, obsolete. Sometimes, the forgotten, enduring wisdom is the precise thing the turbulent future desperately needs to survive. You are the sacred keepers of memory, the dedicated guardians of discernment, and perhaps, just perhaps, the ones deliberately chosen to awaken these buried, vital truths before it is irrevocably too late. This recovered story challenges us, not to abandon the sense of mystery and wonder, but to pursue it with intense, holy caution. It issues a severe warning that technological progress disconnected from spiritual righteousness rapidly devolves into catastrophic destruction. It invites us, compels us, to seek far beyond the manufactured surface, to rigorously test every tradition handed down, and always to remember that the deepest, most life-altering truths often emerge from the margins. From remote caves, from vast deserts, and from the quiet mouths of men like Enoch, who walked faithfully with God when the rest of the world chose, instead, to walk decisively away. So ask yourself today, what essential stories have you been forcefully told to forget? What crucial voices did they silence during your youth? And now, standing here at this moment of revelation, what will you finally do with what has been miraculously unburied? Because if God preserved Enoch's uncompromising message for this specific hour, then maybe you were meant to hear it.
My flag sings vipers to the sky. Melodies flows gentle and free, carrying dreams across the sea. In every note a piece of me, forever here in harmony. My flag sings vipers to the sky. melodies flows gentle and free, carrying dreams across the sea. In every note, a piece of me, forever here in harmony. Music lives inside my heart. Music lives inside my heart.